In the previous video, I made a comment about doing your best to make your mix ready for the radio without using plugins and EQ. The idea is to get the mix sounding as good as possible using only arrangement, levels, and panning. Arrangement meaning choosing which instruments to use and when and how to use them. Levels meaning the volume of the individual tracks, and panning meaning the placement of the tracks within the stereo field. Before I get back into mixing, I'm going to talk about panning. In the previous video, I balanced the drums, but other than the hi-hat and toms, I applied very little panning. This is largely because most of the drum channels don't require panning. The bass drum and snare drum tracks are put in the center most of the time, and many of the overhead and ambience mics are stereo captures that already appropriately represent the stereo field. For most of the remaining tracks in this song, however, panning needs to be given serious consideration. When first learning to mix, it's fairly common to pan everything to one of three places: center, hard left, and hard right. And that gives the biggest possible stereo image, right? Not necessarily. Professionals often refer to this as big mono, which, rather than providing a large panorama of sound, provides a mix lacking definition and depth as all the tracks are panned on top of each other. The two easy fixes for this are to reserve those pan locations for tracks that require emphasis, or to reduce the level of the lesser important instrument when sharing a pan location with an instrument with a similar frequency response. I'm first going to apply this concept in adding in the percussion tracks. Having already mixed the drums and set their levels where I want them, I'm going to pull the rest of the tracks levels all the way down and add them in, keeping the drums as my reference point. And remember, it's crucial that the bass drum and snare drum always cut through the mix. So if they start getting lost, rather than pushing their levels up, I'm only going to allow myself to pull the other tracks down. There are 4 percussion tracks: a dance kick, maracas, shaker, and a tambourine. Since the dance kick only appears in one spot, I'm going to have to jump around a bit in adding in these tracks. These tracks are only providing support for the drums, so I'm going to mix them accordingly. I pushed the dance kick up so it was loud, but still low enough that when the rest of the drums entered, they had a substantial amount of impact. I panned the maracas to the right to counterbalance the hi-hat lead. Instruments occurring more predominantly or solely in one channel can create somewhat of an imbalance in the stereo field, but done right, this imbalance can give the mix depth and motion and keep it engaging for the listener. I brought the shaker in and panned it a bit less than halfway to the left. This helps offset the imbalance created by the maracas, but the two are contributing different textures, so this keeps things interesting. I added in the tambourine slightly to the right. I kept the level of the maracas, shaker, and tambourine lower since they're only there to support the drums. I can push their levels up when I do the campfire remix. It's important to note a couple of things here. The bass drum and snare drum are still punching through all the tracks loud and clear, and the varied pan positions of the percussion are beginning to give the mix a sense of depth. Next, I'm going to add in the bass guitar. It's the bass's responsibility to hold down the low end of a mix, but much of its frequency range is shared with the bass drum, so I need to be mindful of these two things, especially considering they're both panned center. EQ carving may be necessary to get the two to coexist nicely, but I'm going to do the best I can using just the fader. I'm actually pretty happy with how the bass balanced in, and that's without any EQ treatment. It provided low end while staying out of the way and allowing the bass drum to punch through loud and clear. Next, I'm going to bring in the 3 keyboard tracks, a Wurlitzer, organ, and what I believe is a guitar going through a Leslie, which is routed to the keyboard group because of the role it's playing in the mix. The role of these tracks is to provide a pad, which I tend to think of as non-rhythmic harmonic support, as contrasted to the guitars, which are also providing harmonic support, but in a more rhythmic way. The keyboard tracks are here to provide a softer texture and help the mix sound fuller. As such, these tracks don't need to be loud. Though they're both stereo tracks, I found panning the Whirly to the left and the organ to the right provided a pleasing imbalance in the mix. It sounds full and has a good amount of motion, but they're mixed low enough that the drums still punch through loud and clear. I left the Leslie track in the center, as I'm probably going to use a bunch of reverb on it later, which will give it a stereo presence. And I think it's also worth noting that you can still hear every instrument, but also that they're all different levels. This helps give the mix depth. For contrast's sake, if all the tracks were the same volume, the mix would sound very one-dimensional and flat. Next, I'm going to mix in the strings. There's a cello, viola, and a violin section. Primarily, these appear in the beginning of the song before the drums enter, but I'm going to mix them for the part of the song where the instruments are playing. Most likely, the same balance will work for the beginning section, but if not, I can either adjust the trim on the events or use automation. I'll check the beginning section after I mix them in with the rest of the instruments. Like the keyboard tracks, these string tracks are stereo, but I'm still going to play around with their stereo placement. As it turns out, the same levels work nicely for both sections. Since it's the lowest and the most foundational, I kept the cello pan center, and I put the viola slightly to the left and violins slightly to the right. Though the viola and violins aren't always playing at the same time, this again contributes to a pleasing imbalance that keeps the mix interesting. If one of these two were going on the whole time, I'd probably reconsider the pan position or try to find another instrument to use to offset it, as an ongoing imbalance can get irritating to listeners after too long. Next, I'm going to add in the guitars. There are 5 guitar tracks. At a quick glance, I can see the second and third guitars are related, so I'm going to pan them opposite of each other. And I'll pan the others according to their role in the mix. There's a lot going on with the guitars. They're all doing different things, but they work together nicely. Since the Guitar 1 track plays throughout most of the song, I kept it pan-centered. It's providing the rhythmic harmonic foundation. Panning the Fender and Vox guitars opposite of each other helped the mix sound quite a bit wider and fuller. I left the remaining 2 guitars panned to the center. The lead guitar provides melodic support, and the guitar effects track acts more as a pad. I'll probably end up adding quite a bit of reverb to it later. Now I'm going to add in the vocal track. This is the third of the 3 tracks that need to cut at all times in the mix. And in terms of pecking order, most people consider it the song's feature and as such the most important. I found that when mixing the lead vocal track using headphones, I generally set it a bit too loud, so when working that way, I mind that and turn it down a bit from where it sounds right. That said, when I mix, I try to bounce back and forth between using speakers and headphones as much as possible, again, giving slight deference to my perception when using the speakers. All in all, I like where the vocal is. For the most part, it stays on top of the mix. I'll definitely have to use some compression to reduce the dynamic range to help it sit perfectly on top of the track throughout. Finally, I'm going to balance in the harmony vocal tracks. Looking at my color scheme, I can tell I'm working with 3 pairs of tracks, so I'll pan them accordingly. This will give me a good opportunity to use up more of the stereo field. The first pair of harmony vocal tracks seems to most closely support the lead track, so I pan them slightly to the left and right. I found panning vocal tracks that closely support the lead vocal track far afield tends to distract listeners. The other 2 pairs function more like pads, so I pan them further out. This made the mix sound wide, and it provided some smooth texture to the wider parts of the stereo field. I'm pleased that at no point throughout this process did I lose the drums. The bass drum and snare drum sit on top of the mix perfectly throughout, and the other supporting tracks can all be heard, but remain varied enough that the mix sounds not only big, but interesting. Much of this, of course, is due to Scott's excellent arrangement. In the next video, I'm going to start treating the tracks with effects.